I am so excited about your next speaker. So just to put this in context, I don't think it's an over exaggeration that the cell phone has revolutionized the world, and it's allowed us to communicate anytime, anywhere. It's grown entire new industries and businesses all over the world. And according to my next guest, the story of the cell phone has still remains untold until his new book comes out next month, and it's called Cutting the Cord, and it's a look at the profound invention and its effect on the entire world. My next guest is Martin Cooper. He's known as an engineer, he's known as an inventor, an entrepreneur, a futurist, a skier, a tennis player, and that's just to name a few. But he's also the father of the cell phone. So thank you for having Martin join us on the Technonomy stage. And hi to you, Marty Cooper.
Hi, Robin. Great to see you again. I'm just recovering from the yoga session, so be patient with me.
Yeah, as long as it's not the colonoscopy. We'll do that next. But no, Marty, you could talk forever about so many things, but I'm going to take you right to the aha moment that you had in the early 70s when you thought about portability. And the rest of the world was really thinking differently. The solutions was a car phone, which was just as tethered as a house phone. So why don't you set us up by talking about what that was like for you at Motorola?
Well, the observation that we made was that people are mobiles. They're fundamentally mobile. You just look at the highways, it seems like everybody is going somewhere else. Nobody is where they want to be. And yet, for 100 years, the telephone company told us that we have to, if we wanted to communicate with somebody, we have to do it through this wire that tied us to our desk, that leashed us to our to the kitchen wall, when somebody finally came up with a way of getting around that, a mobile phone, Bell Labs came up with the idea of why can't we have a mobile phone? And their version of a mobile phone was a car phone. Could you imagine that? For 100 years, we've been constrained by this wire, and now we're stuck at the car. And we had observed that people are fundamentally mobile. The only way to do it right is to have them be able to communicate wherever they are, everywhere. We were just a little company then, a mere $1 billion or so. AT&T was the biggest company in the world, and their view was they should own this business. They should have a monopoly. They not only wanted to do that, but they wanted to take over Motorola's two-way radio business as well. So we took on the Bell system, and by 1973, the FCC was about to make a decision. The FCC controls the radio waves, and they were about to decide whether to give AT&T a monopoly or have a competitive business. And of course, you know which side we were on. And we got the word that they were about to make a decision, and that's when I decided we've got to do a dazzling demonstration. We have to show people what the potential is, the freedom that comes from being able to talk anywhere. And so I got the support of management, and we literally turned our company upside down, had every engineer in the place working. And on April 3rd, 1973, we made the very first cell phone call, public cell phone call. And here's what the phone looked like. Doesn't really look like much like a little cell phone, does it? But this phone, by the way, weighs 2.5 pounds. It has a battery life of 20 minutes. That's not a problem because you couldn't hold this thing up for more than 20 minutes. So,
tell us, what was the cost of that phone?
Well, the remember, this was a one-off phone. We only built 2 phones. We had to build 2 because these phones were hand-built, thousands of parts all wired together. And so they kept failing. So we had, whenever we demonstrated one phone, we had an engineer standing by with another one just in case it failed. So the bottom line is that we, in fact, did persuade the FCC to have a competitive business. We persuaded them that the system that we used, that was really what our contribution was, Robin, would allow portables, even though the portables just barely worked at that time. But we knew that was the future. AT&T was absolutely convinced that car telephones were the only solution. AT&T predicted there would be the maximum of 900,000 phones in the world, car phones in the world. And they were right. The maximum number of car phones did end up being about less than 1 million. Our story was very simple. Someday, when you were born, you would be assigned a phone number, and if you didn't answer the phone, you had died. And just think about it. There are more phones in the world today than there are people. There are there are 7.5 billion people in the world, and about 5.5 to 6 billion of them have cell phones. There's never been an invention, a device that has been so pervasive. Sorry, I'm talking so much, Robin.
No, keep going, but do share with us that first phone call. So who'd you decide to call? I know you were standing on the corner of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And what was going through your head as you demonstrated the first mobile phone and who you called?
Yeah, well, this was I was doing this for a reporter, trying to show him, and the reason we did it on 6th Avenue is to show him how this was really portability. You could talk from anywhere. And of course, the only thing I was really thinking about was, is this thing really going to work? But fortunately, it did. Just serendipitously, I thought, I'm going to call Joel. He was my, I wouldn't call him an enemy, but he was the counter to our story. He was the AT&T guy. And so I took out my printed phone book. Could you imagine? These were primitive times, if you haven't figured that out yet. I looked up his number, called him, and believe it or not, he answers. Not his secretary, but Joel answers. And I said, "Hi, Joel. Hi, Marty. I'm calling you from a cell phone, but a real cell phone, a personal, handheld, portable cell phone." Silence on the other end of the line. I have a feeling that Joel was gritting his teeth. But to this day, Joel says, "Well, I don't remember that call, but I don't dispute that it happened. And I can understand his position."
Yes,
I've told the story 1,000,000 times, and I hope it doesn't bore you, Robin.
No, he's blocked it out of his mind, I think. So you've written this book that kind of documents more than just the cell phone's history. It's also the present and the future. But let's talk about Motorola for a minute, because I think it's an instructive example for all businesses. Here's this company that really was at the forefront of mobile phones and in the lead. What happened, and what can people learn from what happened?
Well, it is a sad story, because the real contribution in this scenario we described, it was Motorola management. They really, Bob Galvin was the chairman of the board. The president of the company was Bill Weiss. John Mitchell was my boss, president of the company. And they bet the company that portables were the way to go, and they were obviously right. I ended up, I never answered her question about how much the phone cost. The result of this battle that went on was that we did get our way. We ended up with a competitive business. We ended up with a portable system. 1983, the first Dynatec portable, which is commercial, was announced, and it cost you a mere $4,000, which is equivalent to having a $10,000 cell phone today. And it didn't work very well, but lots of people used it, including what was Michael Douglas, as you know. He may have had the only cell phone that we sold at that time. So Motorola really had a very a leadership position, but over a period of years, the guys that took over the cell phone business somehow forgot about Motorola's fundamental principles. Understand the customer, put your mind in the mind of the customer, be paranoid about your competition, don't ever get arrogant. Well, they got arrogant. They thought they owned the business, and for a few years they did. And then along came Nokia, who worked out the logistics of cell phone and came up with inexpensive cell phones. And then after Nokia, I guess they got a little arrogant because Apple came in with a smartphone. So, and Motorola got left way behind, ended up the cell phone business ended up being sold to Google, and it's now a arm of a Chinese company. How sad.
Oh, it's the natural cycle of things. So the phone is the hardware, but there's this wireless network behind the hardware. So what was the size of the wireless network when in the early days of the cell phone?
Well, it's a very simple principle, Robin. The way cell phones work, and I think all of our viewers know that, is that you have your cell phone is a radio, and it listens to transmissions and it transmits. It can't transmit very far, so you have to have a bunch of radio stations all around so that you are never far away from a radio station. For every say $1,000 that's spent on a cell phone, you have to spend $1,000 on this network, on these stations. So the cost of doing this is enormous. When you talk about having 10 billion cell phones at $1,000 a piece, that's up with being $10 trillion. And that's roughly what the cost of the cell phone network is today. So
yeah, and I think that the toughest part, and I know that you have been very involved with the legislation and the regulation over the years. I think the toughest challenge still remains, and that's broadband for everybody, and more inclusivity in the world of the phone. So I know that you talk about the enormity of how many people have been touched by the phone around the world and how people's lives have changed. Why don't you address, the health, the education, some of the things that you love to talk about as enabled by the mobile phone?
Well, that's a very important question, because we have a feeling, because we're in an advanced technology, that the smartphone is the thing that has really changed the world. And that's absolutely wrong. Turns out the biggest impact of a cell phone is in places like Africa, where the cell phone is a tool of productivity, where people are now, they have ways of transferring money, of saving money, of paying their bills, and they do everything with the cell phone. There have been people who have done the research that say that over 1 billion people over the last 20 years, over 1 billion people have moved out of severe poverty just because a cell phone is present. The other major impact has been in healthcare. It turns out that in Mexico, as an example, villages in the hinterlands are now getting healthcare. They're having doctors diagnose people. They have a $5 device that lets the doctor do an eye examination. They have a similarly low-cost device that allows the doctor to listen to a baby who's not yet born. So healthcare, it turns out to be an extraordinary event. But the biggest single thing that cell phones do is let us collaborate. And in order, and what the collaboration is doing is it gives us the potential of having an education system where people are educated as individuals, not as a mass of students. So if there's anything that I think is important, it is revolutionizing, to use your word, our education system. Our education system was created 200 years ago when the Otto von Bismarck in Austria decided that he had to have build an army, and the only way to build an army was to have classes of people. And what they did was the first thing they did when they started out was sing their national anthem, and he was building an army. 200 years later, that's the way we teach people in classrooms. And by the way, when I was small, the first thing we did when I got to work, got to school, was sing "God Save the King," because I was in Canada. And of course, we moved to the United States, and there we were singing the Star Spangled Banner or saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So 200 years without a major change, that's starting to change now. The COVID pandemic is really changing that a lot. But in order to do that, we have to have broadband for everybody. And would you believe that in this country today, 40% of the people in this country do not have access to a significant amount of broadband? 40%. Broadband is now as essential as water and food. You don't have access to broadband, you don't get educated, you don't get all the advantages of that I talked about in healthcare and productivity. So the solution that the government is working on is, well, let's bring wired broadband to everybody. I thought we made that point. I thought we convinced everybody that people are mobile, and the only way to do it right is to have mobile broadband for everybody. And that includes students, because students should be learning all the time. Think about it. Well, when did your education start, Robin? It started when you got out of school, not when you were in school. Education is solving problems. It's doing real world things. When students in the new education, I call it education 2.0, they'll be solving problems. And they will not be solving problems in silos like geography, arithmetic, science. They will be working problems the way we do, the way you do every day, because I know that's what your life is solving problems. You attack a problem and apply all the tools. And boy, do you learn faster do that way.
Absolutely. But you're sitting and you've had strong opinions since you invented the mobile phone, but now we're sitting at the brink of a new administration. 5G is coming out. The FCC, we know that Ajit Pai is about to disappear. What's most important for you as we're sitting here at this cusp is how do we get broadband, and what are you working on? Give us the inside skinny of what we have to do to get everybody on the broadband wagon.
As usual, you ask superb questions. First of all, let me start by saying I think 5G is going to be very important for our society. 5G will allow us to build factories that are run by robots that talk to each other wirelessly, because robots are mobile as well. But the emphasis that's being placed on 5G, I think, is misplaced, because 5G is there to implement the Internet of Things. We haven't finished the Internet of People. And these Internet of Things is a futuristic something. It's going to happen 5-10 years from now. But we've got a problem today. 40% of the people who need broadband don't have access to it. The reason they don't is twofold. Number one is they are in rural areas where there's just not those stations that we talked about. They just don't talk far enough and they don't have service. The biggest problem is people can't afford it. So somehow those are the priorities. Think about what does 5G do for you? I hope you don't have a 5G phone, do you, Robin? Did you? Did you?
5G enabled, whatever that means.
Oh, let me tell you what you did when you bought your 5G phone. You ended up paying a lot more because there's an extra radio in this thing. The battery life is a little shorter. The radio is heavier. So what did you get for all those defects? They talk about high speed. The speed is higher. The speed of 4G is higher than anything you will ever use. The other thing they talk about is latency. I don't know if you're aware of what latency is, but latency will have no effect on your life. I promise you. So you have paid for things that have no impact on your life, and the priority should be on coverage. Let's cover the whole country because you got to have water everywhere. You have to have food everywhere. You should have wireless broadband everywhere, and you should be able to afford it. Those are the highest priorities, not 5G.
Well, I fell for that one, and probably I'm not alone there. But I think your point about the Internet of Things is well taken, and people are also asking. So you were really instrumental in the development of Wi-Fi and the unlicensed spectrum. And can you comment on the importance of that, of cutting the cord, and just how big that was?
Well, let me start by suggesting that, all these things that I describe about the revolution of education, of healthcare, of productivity as a whole, when these things happen, we are going to have 10 times the amount of traffic that we have today. And in order to do that, we have to have radio channels. Well, there's a myth that there are only so many radio channels. And so what our Congress in their great wisdom has done is they auction these things off. Well, what do you do when you buy something for a lot of money and they say, well, we're going to have some more? Well, you buy the additional stuff. So they have created a myth that spectrum is valuable and it's scarce. And it's wrong because the engineers, I used to be one, the engineers have been improving the amount of information we can pass through a radio channel. They've been doubling it every 2.5 years for 100 years since Marconi invented radio. And they know how to keep doubling that in the future. And the reality is that many of the people that are using the radio channels today, what we call the radio spectrum, are not using it very efficiently. They don't want to because they would like to continue this myth of scarcity, because when things are scarce, you can charge more money for them. You can create monopolies or pseudo monopolies. So the biggest problem that we face today is getting people to get the cost down to use the radio spectrum efficiently, because we have only started what the cell phone can do for people. Just think about it.
That is Marty's maxim. So that is one of your maxims, that there is limitless spectrum, and we should know that. I know that you have some other favorite maxims that are in your book. Hit us with another one as we wind down this conversation.
Well,
go ahead.
A favorite one, because If you look on the internet, they actually, the only thing, that's the thing I'm most proud of, because they attribute this to me. The best way to get people to think out of the box is to not create the box in the first place. And to me, that is one of the most important issues in our society today. Everything we do is in silos, in boxes. We have electrical engineers and chemical engineers. We have professors of this and of that. And it turns out that nothing in the real world is in a silo. You know, every problem that you solve crosses over the boundaries of all these things. So we've got to change our whole attitude about everything. But I really would like to talk a little bit about the future of self, if you think that's an appropriate subject.
I certainly do. Yes, I would like to know why we're still calling it a mobile phone in the first place when it's really not. It's hardly a phone anymore. Nobody makes a phone call. So take it away for the future.
It really is. You got it right. I have never figured that out. And why do you call it a cell phone when nobody knows what the word cell means, and they shouldn't have to know? The Germans and the Japanese have it right. They call it the mobile, you know, or the handy, but you know what the function is. But it's my view that we've only started. The impact of cell phone technology on people has only just begun. Because if you think about it in healthcare, we now know how to sense everything that's going on in your body, almost everything. And if we learn how to sense the things that are changing in your body, there is the potential to zap diseases before they become diseases. And just think about that. Someday in the future, this thing that used to be a cell phone and it's now a part of your body, may even be embedded in your body, it may be just a patch, will be able to sense a couple of cancer cells growing and report that to the central computer. And the next thing you know, you get those cancer cells zapped and there is no cancer. There is the potential. I'm talking about generations, so don't look for that in 5 years. There is the potential to eliminate disease. There is the potential to eliminate poverty because we are so inefficient at everything that we do. And one of the things that a cell phone does, it is the oil that makes things happen, that makes us converse. What we're doing today would not be possible with this form of communication. So I think we've only just begun, and that we're going to have some really important changes in the future.
Great. Well, thank you, Marty. It was interesting.
If nothing else, everybody, by cutting the cord when it comes out.
January 5th, available on Amazon. I got you thought I was an engineer, but I'm now a salesman. But on Amazon and your neighborhood bookstore.
Great. And we look forward to
have a great conversation.
Again, soon, you know, Marty, we'll send you, we had a whole conversation 2 days ago about the 21 million older adults who are not connected and sort of, you know, what the impact on the economy has been and productivity. We talked about lower income communities and connectivity 2 days ago. So love that you're sort of thinking about how do we connect everyone. One of the fascinating things I thought that came up was this idea of municipal broadband, that many states would love and cities would love to bring it to their citizens and their constituents, but because of competition and because of the big carriers, it's been, you know, unable to do that. So, you know, working towards how do we solve this connectivity problem, it will be something that we'd love to have you back to talk about.
Thank you very much. I'm available anytime. And next time I won't try to sell my book.
No, we'll make sure we distribute sort of a link as soon as it's out.
I'll sell your book, but
we were fine with that.
That must have been Thomas Camber who spoke about the yeah. Marty, I'll introduce you to Thomas. He's fabulous, a fabulous thinker about aging tech and technology. So
right.
yeah.
Well, Robin, Marty, thanks again for closing out this, 3 days of programming. Really appreciate you being here with us.